Office of Coastal and Land Use Planning, who has responsibility for the Coastal Zone Management Program for the state of New Jersey. It's a program funded by NOAA and also funded by the state of New Jersey. And one of our significant emphasis is coastal hazards. As Randy mentioned, we work with a number of different partners, including Sustainable Jersey and Rutgers, to implement many of the projects that we take on. The coastal zone is defined by the State Coastal Management Program as 39 communities. Most of them are tidally flooded. And they cover 239 communities and about 50% of the state's population. There's significant resources in our coastal zone. I'm not sure what you've heard earlier. I missed Jean and Tony's presentation, but we have a significant coastline. It's a significant economic driver, as well as an ecological habitat and population center for the state. This is the slide on the collaborative that Randy did speak about this morning. Particularly under the last administration, there was really not clear state leadership on resilience or climate adaptation. So we recognize that to make the most effect possible, we needed to partner with those on the outside that were moving forward. Rutgers was a significant contributor, set up the Rutgers Climate Adaptation Alliance, which did a lot of science and policy recommendation work. You've heard from Jean this morning, I'm sure, about all the good work that they've been doing. One of the emphases of our program has been on, we are the Department of Environmental Protection. We got a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Federation to try to bring the message to communities that ecological solutions are an important opportunity for communities in looking at becoming more resilient and maintaining their ecosystems. So we developed an ecological guide, and this is more for the layperson. It's available on our webpage, and I can help you get access to it if you need to. We've been seeing more and more use of developing living shorelines and marsh restoration, along our coastline. One of the things that we're trying to do to determine the effectiveness of these types of approaches, and also to get the message out, is to have a citizen science monitoring program. Working with the local master gardeners, environmental stewards, green teams, to ask them to go out and take a look at these projects that are being implemented at the local level, normally on the small scale, to actually appreciate what's happening and also keep track of what's happening. Many of the ecological projects are kind of like taking care of your garden. You can't just leave it and walk away. You need to go back. You need to maintain it. It's what they call adaptive management. So in keeping up with technology, we have in my office 2 licensed drone pilots, and they are getting requests from every different part of the department and the state, to everything from flying over development sites that are being proposed to look at what's on the ground there, to green acres and blue acres properties where people have bought out land that is vulnerable, and they want to see, okay, how is it evolving? They're looking at erosion rates of shorelines. They're looking at marsh health. Our Office of Emergency Management and the state also wants us to fly the coastline so that we have a baseline. So after the next storm, we can fly it again and see what impacts have happened where. So, we're trying to keep up with technology, and it's a fun and exciting thing, actually, for a couple people in my office to take advantage of. As I said, we do a lot of coastal work. My office in particular has a number of professional planners, and we focus a lot on trying to work with communities and regional entities on educating them on how to become more resilient. We're hoping, as you saw on Randy's slide, that the compendium or the continuum of becoming resilient really is identifying what your problem is, identifying what the solutions are, taking action, monitoring how that action is working, and then continuing on that cycle. A lot of what we have done up until this point right now is just helping communities understand what their vulnerability is, and not taking a lot of steps about how they should be taking action to become more resilient. We did win a competitive award from NOAA to do a regional approach in the two rivers, the Shrewsbury and Navesink rivers in Monmouth County, to work with 15 different communities to look at what their vulnerabilities are, to do a lot of community outreach to understand what the assets that the actual people in the communities thought were important, and to do scenarios on what different actions would accomplish. So in this project, there's going to be 3 different scenario action plans developed with a cost-benefit analysis. So, in listening to the presentation from PSE&G, we're hoping that getting the message to municipal officials, community members, elected officials that you can stay in place, you can replace infrastructure to where it was post a storm, but that really isn't going to make you resilient in the long term. We need to look at cost effectiveness over time, given the threats that we have to climate change. So, and you have small communities that aren't really going to be able to adapt. In this 15 rivers, 15 community group, there's the town of Seabright. Some of you may be familiar with it, but if you look at mapping in 2050, really all that's left, given climate change and sea level rise and a storm event, is the top of the seawall. So, how do you adapt at the community level to something like that? Well, it may be easier to adapt if you take a regional approach. And so we need to do regional planning because, as we've heard from a number of different people today, that most of the land use decisions and land use planning is happening at the municipal level, but we need to be able to broaden that and show communities and regions how they need to work together to become more resilient. We've been using in this regional project and some of our other projects science from probably some of the reports that Jean talked to you about from the Rutgers Climate Alliance, and trying to look at actual different flood levels. So these flood levels may be seen in different communities at different events. So for example, 3 feet of water may be an annual flood in 2050, or it may be permanent inundation in 2100. So we need to be able to give communities guidance on what their threats are when, and also how to adapt to the short, medium, and long-term events and types of flooding that they will be seeing. We did get a competitive grant, it's called a Project of Special Merit from NOAA, started just this year, to actually try to engage more in our planning efforts, because we found it difficult to actually get vulnerable populations and special needs populations to the table. You have a community event in the evening, hoping that this is a time when working people can show up, and it's the typical type of people that you would expect to come. It's the planning board members, it's the more well-to-do people that frequent these types of events, and we haven't really figured out how to get the message out to people that we don't normally talk to. So this whole project is about trying to have the vulnerable and special needs communities have a seat at the table so that we can hear their perspective. And so, it's good to hear from Anna, like that whole idea if, you're going to put affordable housing in a location. I understand that you want people to maintain their culture and, take advantage of the waterfront. It's just if it's going to be publicly subsidized, or, if we're going to repair it, after a storm event, is that the best place for them? And I think those are the kinds of conversations that, we need to hear the perspective of the communities that are there, because we haven't yet to this point. And, I would think you would not want, vulnerable populations in a flood-prone area. But I think, that's a conversation that we need to hear from them. So we are taking that approach that we took in the 15 towns in Monmouth County in developing regional resilience action plans to 4 more planning areas in the state. This is funded by HUD. It's a National Disaster Recovery funding that the state won post-Sandy. We won $10 million to develop an approach to kind of get more into the nuts and bolts of, okay, not just talking about vulnerability, but what are the right cost-effective responses in different regions. So we just recently announced the community groups that have been selected to be part of this project. And I think it's a decent mix of communities. So I think we're going to be able to identify solutions and planning efforts and strategies in these 4 regions that also will be translatable to other parts of the state. So far we've identified the community groups. Our next step is to identify consultants that will develop teams that will go into these regions. We didn't want the traditional municipal engineer and planner, if they existed, to be the ones advising these regions on how they can adapt, because oftentimes they don't do anything more innovative than they're used to doing in a community. They do, the traditional thing that the short-term, politician wants to hear. And, we really want people to come in from the outside and give people in these regions an opportunity to be more creative than that. So our next step is to identify those consulting teams. We'll also be hiring some nonprofits to advise us on how to get to some of the critical issues that aren't the traditional issues. Just 2 weeks ago, we had the Department of Environmental Protection, with the help of the Governor's Office and the Urban Coast Institute at Monmouth University, had a coastal summit. And we had about 150 people there, and our commissioner and the Governor's Office announced that the department will be starting a coastal resilience plan for the state of New Jersey. So this is a huge effort that we're undertaking. Many other states, in our region and around the country have already done this kind of work, so we're behind, and we recognize the need to step forward. The purpose is to try to figure out how to align public resources, policies, regulations with encouraging the right action at the local level through the state's ability to influence those efforts. We want to coordinate across the state agencies, not hold it just within DEP, but also look at transportation planning, affordable housing, and other, water and wastewater infrastructure, location, and investment, so that we're doing a comprehensive approach about, how and when we are adapting to climate change. As part of this too, we will be working with the Governor's Office and hopefully establishing a climate change sea level rise standard or policy for the state. A number of other states are actually or have already done that, either through executive orders or legislation. So that's going to be a really exciting component of this effort. The commissioner announced what her priorities were for the agency, and then, you know, the top one was reduce and respond to climate change. So, you know, we're a little bit on the hot seat to help her accomplish her agenda and the Murphy administration agenda. At the Coastal Resilience Summit, you know, we had proposed a timeline to take specific actions in the Coastal Resilience Plan, you know, to the commissioner and our senior management team. And she announced, without talking to any of us, you know, at the staff level, that we would be accelerating that approach because new information had come out showing additional threat to the state. So, you know, now we're, you know, hopefully going to be able to own up to what our commissioner is expecting of us. So that's my presentation.